I'd like to begin by welcoming you all to our Office of the Attorney General event. This is our second event. We had an event, some of you were here last year, some of you were not. We had a wonderful event last year, which was really the opening of a relationship with various offices of the Attorney General to discuss how the Office of the Attorney General does work in protecting our community. And today we are, I think, looking forward to another wonderful day. Again, last year was amazing, but this year I think is really interesting because we are living in a very different reality than we were last year. And this year's topic, protecting immigrants, is of particular concern, I think, to all of us as people who live in the United States, but really it's particularly concerning to this college and to the students at this college. And I know that some of you here are dreamers, and I've spoken to a few this morning. This is a topic that really has a really important resonance for us here at John Jay. One of the things that I note in my work as the director of the Pre-Law Institute is that virtually every day, and I think it's probably more than once, a student comes to my office to say, the reason I want to become a lawyer is because of my own immigration background. Something that happened to me, or something that happened to my parents, or something that happened to someone in my community is the reason why I want to become a lawyer. I want to address these problems. And so this is something that I'm personally very acutely aware of because I hear it every day, and I know it's something that's really important to this community in a way that very few other issues are. So I'm happy to have this crowd here today because I do think this opportunity is going to be eye-opening for us. One of the things that I was thinking about this morning was that even myself as a lawyer, I've often thought that the realm of immigration was largely and solely really the province of the federal government. And I think what's interesting today is we're going to hear a much more rich version of the interplay between the federal and the state actors in dealing with this issue of immigration, and really how the Office of the Attorney Generals protect immigrants in a way that is really crucial, particularly in this context. So I'm really excited to welcome you all here this morning. It's really great that you came on the Friday, particularly students the day after your last day of classes. I do appreciate your being here and being on time. So thank you very much. Before I introduce the next speaker, I'd like to say one thing that's really also very exciting about today is that thanks to the hard work of Mindy Bachstein and her team, but really through the generosity of the Pfizer Corporation, we're really pleased to announce that we have inaugurated this year what we call the Pfizer cohort. And what that means is that we've selected 10 students, some of whom are here. Is a Pfizer cohort person here? I think, Liam, you are a Pfizer cohort person. We have some Pfizer cohort people here who, these are 10 students we selected because of their promise and their interest in the work of the Attorney General's office. We selected them, and they're going to participate in our summer LSAT prep program, which is going to be free of cost to them, and they are going to have the opportunity to engage in an experiential learning opportunity with an Office of the Attorney General somewhere in the tri-state area or perhaps further afield. So we're really grateful to Marcus Green, to Mindy and her team, and to the Pfizer Corporation for making this possible for our students. So if we could just give them a round of applause for that, because that's a really extraordinary opportunity. But without further ado, because we are on a tight schedule, and this individual is always on a tight schedule, I'm going to introduce President Jeremy Travis, who's going to inaugurate this event. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here, spend some time with you, to have a little informal mingling time before the launch of your workshop today, and before, unfortunately, I have to leave right after these remarks. So it's just nice to be here among friends. It's always nice to see new traditions starting at John Jay. So here we are, second year. That means it's a tradition. Third year gets to be sort of like old hat. That's what we always do. But this is a good reaffirmation of a very good idea. And the good idea that brings us together is, first of all, the role of attorneys general in the United States. We want to try to understand that as a sort of academic and scholarly question. But as Charles Davidson said, what better time than this year? And I'll return to that in a second. And it's also a collaboration with the Pre-Law Institute. So where's Charles? A big shout out to you for what you've done at John Jay. I want to return to that in a second, just talk some more about that. And it's a collaboration with Pfizer. So Marcus, just thanks so much for what you have done to make this possible. And I got a little sort of Mindy whispered to me this morning what Charles just said officially, which is that Pfizer is committed to helping our students succeed in the Pre-Law Institute, and that's just a wonderful act of support for the aspirations of our students, and it's good to see that corporation stepping up, and you personally as an alum, that's also has a personal meaning for you, I'm sure. I know, because I know you. So that's also a wonderful act of generosity. So I also want to welcome back to John Jay, Tracy-Ann Ulett, who is here. So at this table, so I didn't know this till I read my briefing materials, we have 2 alumni from John Jay, Marcus in 95 and Tracy-Ann in 2012, is that right? 2 summa cum laude graduates of John Jay. So let's just realize that we are in the presence of royalty here. This is really, really great. And obviously both went on to law school to do good things. Also, where is Lynn? Just to say, Lynn Ross, where did I sort of keep scanning the room and just don't see. So Lynn Ross, who is a friend of mine from my Washington chapter of my life, and was here last year and knows about attorneys general and has been part of that national association. So good to have you back as well. Let me just say a few things about the 2 topics that have come together today. One is the role of attorneys general, and the second is the role of the Pre-Law Institute here at John Jay. So you'll hear in a moment from one of the leaders in the National Association of Attorneys General, who will talk some more about the role. But what's particularly interesting is that in the era of the new national administration, let's just put it that way, it'll be really fascinating to watch attorneys general around the country exercise their legal authority to challenge policies that they, representing us, think violate the Constitution or are illegal or just go, it has to have a legal basis, but sort of go too far in some way or other. And we've already seen it with the travel ban. We'll see it with healthcare. We'll see it with some of the threatened defunding of programs, exercising the authority of attorneys general to bring constitutional claims under different provisions, equal protection, 10th Amendment, whatever. So when we ask what does our democracy provide in a moment of deep concern about the future of our democracy, our democracy provides a judicial system. But a judicial system is only activated by lawyers, right? It just doesn't stand there in splendid isolation and say things. So it has to be activated by lawyers. Then you ask the question, there are certainly private lawsuits that are brought, sometimes class action lawsuits. But what's interesting about attorneys general is they represent us. So they speak in a different way in a time when our democracy is being challenged because they represent the citizens. They are elected by us. So you're here today to get a sort of an object lesson in the way that power of attorneys general is being exercised somewhat differently given the changing political dynamics in the country. And this is something to watch over the coming years, just to see how this plays out. But it's not just a lawyer going into court, it's a lawyer representing us. And sometimes that raises questions when someone says, well, that Attorney General doesn't represent my views. That happens all the time, right? Why does the Attorney General of Hawaii stop the travel ban, says somebody in Hawaii? He doesn't represent me because I support the travel ban, perhaps. So there's that hypothetical problem that's quite real right now. So you'll hear from Mr. Tierney. We're very pleased that James Tierney is here. He's a New Yorker by birth, New Yorker by, I think by sort of emotional connection, and was the Attorney General of the state of Maine, where he chose to exercise his law practice, and was very active in the national work. I'm sorry I can't be here, Attorney General Tierney, to hear your remarks. But let me bring it back to John Jay. So that's what's so fun about this morning and why what Charles and Mindy have done is so exciting. So the Pre-Law Institute that we created 10 years ago, are we on 10? 11 years ago, has become this sort of engine within for student ambition and consideration of legal issues within John Jay. So Marcus, when you were here, there was no such thing. I don't know how you made it to law school. You probably, it was somebody who was called a law school advisor or something like that. obviously you've done very well. So it's not like the Pre-Law Institute is the first time any of John Jay graduates have thought about going to law school, but it's now a program. It's now a funded program. It's now a systematic program. So Charles, when we had a moment in the corner, said that he's got some data that he's going to, I think you'll allow me to confirm this one at least, is that of all the colleges in the country that send students to law school, there's now a ranking. And John Jay ranks 31st in the country for sending the largest number of law students into law school. So, Elizabeth, you get to take a bow now. Charles takes a bow. Vielka, who is here in spirit always, gets to take some credit here also. So this is a very good thing for our students. So what you know is that the Pre-Law Institute is a way for you to realize that ambition. What Charles is next going to find out for us, because one of our goals is to increase the diversity of the legal profession, and we do that really well, and that's why law schools love coming to John Jay to find the students they're looking for. But my guess is it's not 31, it's really way in the top of that list in terms of the number of students of color who leave John Jay and go and succeed in law school. So we're doing something important for the country, for the legal profession, but most importantly for our students. So I just want to say thank you to Charles, Elizabeth, and all of the faculty and others who work on the Pre-Law Institute. So this is also a sort of emotional moment for me, because this is the last time even though it's only the second year we've done this, I won't be here for the third year. I think you know that I'm stepping down as president. Someone used that dreaded retirement word a couple of minutes ago. That's not what I'm doing. I'm going to be at the Graduate Center. I'm going to be teaching. I'm going to be writing. And as I like to say, I'm going to be making some trouble, because I really want to devote as much of my personal energy, intellectual energy, and just sort of social energy, justice energy as I can to the criminal justice reform work of the country. But I couldn't be happier about where John Jay is, and particularly the Pre-Law Institute, which is one of the first things that I created all these years ago, and to see where it is today, and that it's able to connect with these issues. That's the whole goal, is that as your education is unfolding, and the Pre-Law Institute allows you to think about the issues that you could be involved with, certainly as a member of our community, but perhaps as a practicing lawyer, and you take those passions when you study law, and then you could go do something like what Tracy-Ann is doing. What's she working on? We just had a little chat. What was your major when you were here? Political science. Okay, perfect. So she's working for the Attorney General of the District of Columbia, working at the intersection of behavioral health, mental health law, the courts, the criminal justice system, and the police, to help them figure out how to deal with somebody who's mentally ill, who's on the streets. What could be more important, and what could be more justice related than that work? So very proud of you, Tracy, and I'm glad you keep coming back. So have a great conference. I've got to run off and do something else. Good to see all of you, and think of me next year when you come back, okay?
Good morning. We can do better than that. Good morning. Good morning. First, I want to again thank Jeremy Travis for his leadership. I mean, just look around, have someone who has been at John Jay before it was this. This doesn't come easy, and the road to this is leadership. And so, although he's leaving, I want everybody to just give him a round of applause, because it's just fantastic. Thank you. So we have an exciting program this morning on protecting immigrants, and so I'm not going to take up too much time, although people often make the mistake of turning over the microphone to a lawyer and a son of a preacher. And so I'll try to be brief. Now, I will be brief. And I thought about this morning, like, what words I want to say and what I want to talk to you about. And there's a lot of things that anytime I get in front of students, and particularly alumni, I like to give some words of wisdom. And I think I'm going to resist that urge, right? I mean, because it's all the same things. Work hard, take advantage of the opportunities in front of you, take advantage of the professors that you have that are steeped in experience and knowledge, do internships, all of those things, you must do those. But what I want to talk to you about is something else, something a little deeper. When you think about your life, I want you to think about trying to come up with a thread or a purpose. And when I say a thread, a mantra, something that drives you, whether it's service. And throughout your life, try to take that thread and kind of weave it through the kind of quilt or tapestry of your life, and it'll serve you well. And I'll give you an example. So for me, it's serving the least among us, right? So no matter what job I'm in, whether it's I'm in the prosecutor's office, I'm in the AG's office, I'm at Pfizer, I look for ways and I challenge myself and say, how do I serve the least among us? And it sounds like, you know, a very complex question, but it's really not. Asking yourself, what are you doing to serve? Because, you know, we're a community. Regardless of how divided the nation is on issues, ultimately it comes down to us and working on issues large and small of the day. And so when you look at protecting immigrants, these are the most vulnerable, right? These are the people who are oftentimes voiceless, and being in a position, doing your part to stand up for the least among us is an incredible challenge. So I want you to think about coming up with your own thread, and no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, no matter what job you're doing, challenge yourself to do that, to do whatever it is, whatever form of service it is. So that's my challenge to you. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about touches on what Jeremy Travis spoke briefly about, which is the current state of our nation. Because it's very easy to get disillusioned. It's very easy to think that, you know, the sky is falling. Are there tremendous problems? Absolutely, there are tremendous problems. Is there racism? Yes. Sexism? Yes. Anti-Semitism? Yes. Xenophobia? Yes. Police brutality and abuse? Yes. But despite all of that, all of you, by the virtue of the fact that you're sitting here, have a tremendous opportunity. Regardless of the problems that we have in this country, by far, when it comes to opportunity and freedom, this is the greatest country on the face of the planet, period. It really is. You can literally come from nothing and make something out of yourself, right? I'm number 7 of 8 kids. I grew up in a 2-room shack, and by all accounts, I shouldn't be standing here. And it's just the ability to take advantage of opportunity, and that's what you have to do. And so this notion of the American dream, regardless of what people are saying, it's still very much alive, but it doesn't come easy, right? You have to work for it. You have to claw for it, right? Dr. King said the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, but it doesn't do it on its own. You have to push, you have to fight, and it's all of you. So I just want to thank you guys for the fact that you're sitting here this morning on a Friday after class shows that you're headed in the right direction. And so I hope you ask questions, participate, think about the larger issues that we're dealing with as a country, and think about what you can do to contribute. So thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for having me again back to New York City. It is a huge relief to get out of Washington, D.C. So I want to echo what our other introducers this morning have said. It is really a pleasure to be here. When I look out at the room, by the way, show of hands, how many of you were at our last program on Attorneys General? Several of you. Encourage all your friends to come to these programs because it will give you a perspective not only for future employment, but it will make you eventually more informed voters. You will know what's going on, and you will know how your rights are protected at the state level in the United States. I also wanted to say, be aware of the importance of networking. You know, it's interesting. I've known our speaker, Jim Tierney, since I think not close to where we were all your age, but probably, he's nodding, yeah, probably close to some of your ages. I didn't know Dr. Davidson before I started working here, but it turns out we are alums on the same campus as he is a Fletcher graduate. I didn't know Mindy really, but I knew of Mindy because she worked for Attorney General Eliot Spitzer. I knew Marcus from the time that he was at Pfizer and maybe before when you were chief of staff to former Attorney General Peter Harvey of New Jersey. And I know every Attorney General of New York by virtue of my own work back to, I don't want to say Louis Lefkowitz because there's only a few of you who will know even who he was. And I'm really started in the Attorney General world when I was 12, so that says something. So today I have the pleasure of introducing a person whose name you see often in the press. He has so many talents that they are too numerous to describe really in an introduction. I think it's interesting to note that he was elected to the Maine legislature at age 25. So I won't make you put up a show of hands as to who's 25 in this room, but imagine being elected to the legislature in New York at age 25, and by age 29 he was the majority leader. So you can tell about Jim Tierney that he was a person at an early age who cared deeply about Maine and wanted to make a difference. He's got an interesting life story that he will tell you. He served as Attorney General of Maine from January 6, 1981 to January 6, 1991. Maine is interesting in that the Attorney General is elected by secret ballot of the legislature. Who does that? Only Maine, only in Maine. And I don't know, do we call you maniacs or what do we call you? He's got just a varied professional career, which is all great. Attorneys General hire him sometime to do special investigations. He did one on public corruption that I remember well. He's a consultant to attorneys general. He set up a state attorney general training institute at Columbia. He now teaches at Harvard. One of my favorites was if you ever, or your family members ever watch Court TV. I loved it, Jim, when you said as a commentator, we're now going to approach the bench. And you knew something momentous, supposedly, was supposed to happen. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. There's no one better to really talk about the program topic, an activist state attorney general, role as innovator, policymaker, and change agent. Jim Tierney loves students. He cares deeply about making the world a better place. And he's a person who has and will continue to make a huge difference. I did go back and after I found out there's an electrician named Jim Tierney and I think a music maker and a whole host of other people named Jim Tierney or James Tierney, I did find something from I think it was one of your, the headline, I won't read you the headline, but it was The Unmasking of Maine and Beyond, where he did a panel discussion talking about immigration. It was a Portland audience. I couldn't find the date, but I thought it was interesting. Former Maine Attorney General James Tierney told the Portland audience Tuesday evening that the state's economy will depend on its ability to attract and accommodate newcomers from foreign countries. Maine must reject, quote, the politics of fear and embrace programs that create opportunities for immigrants. I imagine this was in the last year or two. But that has always been the Jim Tierney that I know reaction to current issues and problems. So, Jim, you're next.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. I'm probably going to sound like I'm repeating your president and Marcus. I was very touched. Marcus, I've never heard you speak before. Marcus is by far of all the graduates of John Jay the best dresser. I mean, there's just no question. He outdoes himself every time, makes the rest of us feel a little dowdy. Thank you for letting me come. This is a school that has an extraordinary mission. And it's one that's known certainly all across the United States and around the world. And so I jumped at the chance when Lynn asked me to come. Lynn is an old friend. She's made the world better, as we all have tried to do as we've gone through our times. And so for all of you here on a Friday morning and all of you who will be watching diligently because we're taping this morning, let me try to say a few words about activist attorneys general. What does that mean? And how do attorneys general set policy? The real experts on how attorneys general deal with immigrants are going to be here on the next panel. Our representatives from the New York AG's office are true national leaders on this. Most of you are from New York and will be living in New York and have personal issues that arise from your time here in New York, and so they're the real experts, not me. But hopefully I can set sort of a framework, a national framework, if you will. And but I was troubled with it. I just turned 70 years old, and so my question is, for many of you who are my grandchildren's age, what is it exactly I can teach you? I come from a state which is the oldest state in the country, the whitest state in the country. And I suppose one thing I can teach you is, of what happens to a state when it doesn't have people of color, when it doesn't have the fresh results of immigration. Lynn's correct. I've given a number of speeches in Maine, one at Bates College in particular, if you're interested. But it shows what happens if you just don't have this whole energy level that comes from the rest of the country. 94%, this is an astounding figure, 94% of the growth in the United States, people are from families of color, not from white people like me. So if this country is to grow and to expand and become diverse and to have the energy that it's always had, it's not going to come from people who look like me or sound like me. It's going to come from more like people who look like you and who look like this amazing city where I spend so much of my time. So anyway, I was troubled about what I could say, and so earlier this week, I go to Washington, D.C. a lot. We're having a meeting there on consumer protection. I got there a little early, and I did something I've never done before. I went to Arlington National Cemetery. Most of you probably know or have read that Arlington National Cemetery is our cemetery which is not exclusively but primarily dedicated to veterans and people who've either died in the service or served for long periods and keeping us safe in our armed forces. So I walked around. It was a nice day. This was Tuesday. And this amazing place. I learned a lot. I learned that there are 400,000 graves in Arlington National Cemetery. Veterans of every war, 600 acres of land. And I'd never been there. So I trudge up this hill, and I start to see the gravestones on the side, and I must admit I noticed a significant number of them, at least where I was walking, were mostly men, but men and women who were my age. They were people born the same time I was. And yet they'd either been killed in the war or died for some reason and were buried, and that's kind of a sobering way to start your day. There were over 4 million visitors go to Arlington National Cemetery, and I saw many of them, people of all colors. I saw Muslims and Jews and Catholics. You could tell by on the gravestones. So it was a microcosm, if you will, of our country. And so I was naturally drawn to the graves of President Kennedy. John Kennedy is buried there, the President of the United States, assassinated over 50 years ago, and his brother Robert, who was assassinated 49 years ago this month. And after spending a few moments there in tribute to them, I saw there was a little path that went around to the right. It looked a little unusual, so I went around the corner, and there were plenty of gravestones around, but right in front of them was a gravestone of somebody I knew. I was kind of surprised. His name was Allen Lowenstein, and he'd been a one-term congressman is all. He was a private, a PFC in the Army, which is, I assume, how he ended up being buried in Arlington. But he was a great fighter for civil rights, and he fought to stop the Vietnam War, and he fought racism, and he'd been active in the South in the 60s. People my age have heard of him, and I was touched by seeing his gravestone so close to the Kennedys. He died 37 years ago. So I went home and did some research, and I watched some old TV interviews of Al Lowenstein. And he said something which ended up being the key to my remarks to all of you today. He says, integrity is the basis of democracy. you think about nothing else today, take Al's words with you. Integrity is the basis of democracy. I said, well, I think I know what integrity means, so I look it up in the dictionary. And there are actually two distinct meanings. Integrity means being honest and true. But integrity also means to be integrated. It also means to take disparate parts and put them together. Integration, right? Integrity, same basis, the same word. And I hadn't had that quite perspective. I said, wow, there's democracy for you. Honest and true, and integration, integrated into a common thought and theme. And this is what Marcus was talking about in his remarks. Because we're all so different. We have all these huge problems. So how can democracy solve them? What is it that draws us together? And I would say to you, those of you who are interested in being lawyers or interested in the world of attorneys general, that it's our Constitution and our laws that bring us together. And believe me, there's plenty of room to disagree within that framework, right? But it works. It actually works. Worked in my life. My story is not at all unusual. I'm not telling it because there's some sort of uniqueness about it. But it's America's story, like Marcus's family's story. My mother came from a terribly abusive home in Brooklyn, where she was born. When my grandfather, James, of course, I was named for him, dropped dead in the street. He's an alcoholic. It provided enough benefits from New York State government that she could be taken out of the orphanage where she was placed, even though her parents were alive. Her family was so abusive. And so she got out of the state-run home, and she began to live her life. But they didn't have the value of education that everyone in this room did, so when she was 14 years old, she dropped out of high school. My father's an immigrant. He showed up. His mother and my Uncle Willie were stopped at Ellis Island. They sent him in alone, and he had a note, a 10-pound note, which he'd gotten when he left Ireland, and from selling a bicycle. And welcome to New York. He said, well, I've got this address I have to find over in Brooklyn. I've got to get over there. He's like 14, 15 years old. He spoke English. A lot of people come to this country don't have that benefit. But he's from Ireland. He spoke English. And the guy came up, he said, in a uniform. And he said, really, do you have any money? He said, yeah, I've got this money. So give me this money, I'll make sure you get there. So my dad gave him the money, and the guy took off, right? Welcome to America. So here he is. He's got no money. He's 14, 15 years old. He's standing down here on the west side, 23rd Street or so. That's where the boat came in. So he started to walk. What else are you going to do? And he asks directions, and he eventually finds his way over to Brooklyn, where some cousin he'd never met knocks on the door, puts him in the basement, gives him a piece of cheese, has him sleep on a blanket on the basement of the floor. Welcome to America. So what happens? They have a horrible time, my mother and father. This is not some sweetness and lightness marriage, but they did hard physical work their whole lives. They kept getting fired because they had opinions. Having opinions isn't necessarily the best way to promote job security. Maybe some of you have already learned that. Some of you already figured that out. They kept getting fired. My father suffered terrible depression. Obviously, why? When you look back, you can see their experiences. And we ended up being stuck in Maine for a variety of reasons not worth going into. Thank God we had government checks that would show up in our house when I was a kid. And maybe some of you have been in a situation, those first 2 weeks after the government come every month, those first 2 weeks after the government check comes in, they were good weeks. Second 2 weeks in the month, not so good. So you've had this feeling. But one thing we always had books, because we had libraries that were free, right? And we had schools that were paid for by taxpayers. And we had police officers that kept us safe. And we had court systems that worked. And so we kept going to school. We kept working at it. But we didn't do it alone. And some people, they were born on third base and they thought they hit a triple, right? That wasn't us. We just kept working at it. And so at the end of the day, my sister and my two brothers, we get together a lot. We've all gone to college, government colleges like this one, supported by the taxpayers like this one. And we all have advanced degrees. We had a bunch of kids. They've all gone to college. And we've been very, very fortunate. So the system worked for us. The safety net worked for us. Are we rich? No, none of us are rich. Do we have enough money? Absolutely. Absolutely. We're fine. That's one of the things I could never figure out. I could never figure out why people just need to get more and more money, I really don't understand it. Your budget for your entire school, including what you pay and what the taxpayer pays for this school, is $100 million. Some billionaire yesterday bought a painting for $100 million. What's that all about? One guy, a painting in $100 million. Go back. He's not listening to Marcus, right? Helping the least. Always remember where you came from. This guy. What is this about? I've never understood that. So the safety net worked for me, and we always thought that we wanted to make it easier for people who could climb up the ladder behind us. But there are a lot of people in this country who don't believe in that. And either they didn't make it on their own, they just inherited it, or they made it on their own and they don't want to make it easier. They're threatened by people coming along behind. Right? Very large percentage. Almost it's decided whether a quarter to a third of the Latino vote in the United States last November voted for President Trump. There are people who have come along and then said, well, here we are, and we're not letting anybody else in. Because we must be special. We must be extra. I worked really hard to get where I am. Well, it's true. I worked hard. Marcus worked hard. Many of you have worked hard. But that doesn't mean you did it on your own. That doesn't mean you did it on your own. All those invisible people who paid taxes, people who didn't have children paid taxes to schools to help me go to school. That's what we do, right? If you fight to protect the environment, guess what? Nobody knows. If the air is clean, the water is clean, you go to a tap in New York City, it's one of the cleanest drinking waters of any city in America. You drink the water. You don't know that somebody had to work to make that happen. By definition, you don't know, right? The air is still clean, the water's clean, you're not sick. You just walk past a huge hospital. If you get sick, you'll be there in 10 minutes, right? This doesn't happen by accident. But there are those who are attempting to destroy the core premise of integration. The first time it was really articulated for the federal government with Franklin Roosevelt in the 30s. It was the first time the federal government established a relationship with individuals, things like Social Security. Now it's Medicare, Medicaid, health care. People want to break that. They want to say you're on your own. And I listen to some of those radio stations and TV stations sometimes, and I don't get it. Don't come close with get it. But it's the way it is. And their neighbors too. They seem to think that skin color doesn't matter, right? They seem to think that all technology is good. You know, I may be the last person in America who doesn't use Uber. Because I think every time I think about it, I know some taxi driver isn't getting a fare. Bothers me. So I don't use it. I know it's silly, but it's my own little personal protest, if you will. And there have been times when I haven't been able to get a cab. I want you to know, standing on the street. So it may not be the smartest thing I ever did, but it's a matter of my small little principle that technology doesn't always help people. So how does this come to attorneys general? Attorneys general are independent lawyers. They're in state government. There's nothing like it in the federal government. And they supervise 13,000 assistant attorneys general, several of them who are here today. And you've got a great one in New York. There's a great one in the District of Columbia, the bosses, if you will, of our next speakers. They all, but every day they get up to do things. And, you know, when they do things, they're not always doing things they agree with, because, you know, government makes mistakes just like the rest of us. When you make a mistake, that's when you need a lawyer. It's not like you wake up in the morning and say, oh, I gotta go. I'm really having a great day. Nothing's wrong. I'm going to go see my lawyer. No, that doesn't happen. You're going to your lawyer when you got a problem, right? So state government's the same way. It makes mistakes, and so you need to have a lawyer to represent you, and the Office of Attorney General is there to defend you, take care of you, even if it's a mistake. So sometimes attorneys general are doing things that they'd rather not do, but we're lawyers, right? We've got a job to do. You have to help people. That's part of the job, to help the whole system work. But within that, you do develop a sense that comes from the Office of Attorney General saying, we really are here. They have deep in the DNA of the Office of Attorney General is what Marcus said, that we're here to help the least of us. It's very deep in the DNA, right down to the administrative assistants and the investigators. Somewhere in there is this sense we are here to do the right thing. We are not here to exploit. We are not here to take advantage of people. And that's pretty important. So it was pretty natural then, if that is deep in the DA of AG offices, that when the President of the United States signed an unconstitutional travel ban in January, that it was the attorneys general who'd say, whoa, wait a minute, we're going to go to court and try to stop that. And they did. And so it's not unusual when a system sort of functions here. And you know, you can tell, and Lynn Ross and I both know all the people who've gone through the ranks of attorneys general, and so we now have 9 former attorneys general are in the United States Senate. 9 of them out of 100. That's a lot. And they carry with them this same sort of DNA principle that, wait a minute, right is right and wrong is wrong. And so now we have the President of the United States who is under investigation. He should be under investigation. And those former AGs in the Senate, both parties have said, yeah, we need to have an investigation. This has to be a fair one. We have to find out what happened. Now, he's not particularly happy about being investigated. If any of you, I've never been investigated, but if any of you have been, I imagine it's kind of an uncomfortable feeling. I can understand why it might ruin his trip to Saudi Arabia thinking about it. But I'd hate to see that happen. But the point is, there is an investigation. And my point to all of you is that this system works, right? That there is a structure to it, right? So it appears, I'm not sure, that the next head of the FBI is going to be the former Attorney General of Connecticut. So this process of being an Attorney General, what it means and how it gets carried out is vitally important. Now, the title here is to talk about immigrants. I'd like to broaden that, if you will, a little bit and talk about diversity. Because, I mean, once you start talking about immigrants, you start dividing people up. My father was an immigrant. My mother wasn't, right? My oldest 2 siblings are immigrants, but my younger brother and sister are not. I mean, you get all mixed up, right? If you try to make that line in a way which, by definition, is going to be arbitrary. So instead, I think we should talk about diversity. Now, if you want to know what AGs are doing about diversity, then I suggest you do some research. I mean, listen to this panel, listen to me, but mostly you're going to have to do some work. You're students. You have to figure that out. I run a website, stateag.org. Go to it. And beneath it, you'll find a website I ran at Columbia Law School for 10 years, which has a lot of information there about what attorneys general do about diversity, what they do about criminal justice, what they do about labor law enforcement, what they do about basic constitutional rights that we all have. And research it and study it. There are videos and there are articles. Because you're students. If this was a different kind of crowd, I'd do it in a different way. But I'm anticipating that you're all going to be the lawyers or police officers, and I hope you are, or work in the criminal justice system in some way. So I think I want to end by coming back to Al Lowenstein. And that the line I want you to remember, that, you know, the connection between democracy and integrity is pretty core. But that's not what's on his gravestone. On his gravestone, which I was shocked to see, but it's a wonderful quotation. It's from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson was a transcendentalist New England philosopher, 19th century. And the quotation is as follows. He said, if the single man, now today hopefully he'd write men and women, but if the single man plants himself indomitably on his instincts and there abides, this huge world will come around to him. Think about that. If a single person, just you, I'm not talking about your mothers, your sisters, your professors, not talking about Marcus or Lynn or me, I'm talking about just you, yourself. You formulate your instinct and you abide, you stick with it, then this whole huge world will come around to you. Thank you very much.
We've got just a little bit of time maybe for a question or two. Anybody have one? Now's your golden moment. Surely somebody has a question.
No, they're shy. Hi, Lourdes.
Finally. Hi. I had a question about at your time when you were AG of Maine, about how much you collaborated with other AGs around the country on different projects. In the current climate, we're doing a lot of work with other AG offices, and I was wondering if that was something new or has that historically been the case?
Yes, AGs have always worked together. 2 things make it easier. The first is the concentration of the American economy. It used to be if a company did something wrong, the company was probably owned and operated by people who lived in Maine. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. We live in an entire world where our economy is completely integrated. And what happens at a pharmacy in, Lisbon Falls, Maine, where I live, and a pharmacy around the corner is going to be exactly the same because they're large corporations, hedge fund, equity-owned operations. That's the way it works. I mean, your dentist, probably works for a company that's owned by a hedge fund. I mean, so the idea of thinking that you could do this by yourself doesn't make any sense. Plus, some issues that arise, such as privacy, internet privacy, are inherently multi-state in nature. So the technology allows attorneys general to work across state lines. It happens a lot. And there are a significant number of different cases that are going on at any given time. Email makes it possible, and one of my goals now in life is to actually, it's great to do things on Skype, but there's nothing like getting together in the same room. So one of my goals is to create channels of assistant attorneys general like yourself, Lourdes, who do the same kind of work to get together with your colleagues from California and Illinois and Iowa and North Carolina and Texas, wherever it happens to be. But yes, it's always been there. When Lynn was running NAG, she would bring us together for congressional hearings. There was always congressional testimony from attorneys general in front of the U.S. Senate, and Lynn was in charge of making sure that happened, getting me out of Maine, making me go to Washington and testify, which I did on many occasions at her request. Yes, so I hope that's a little bit longer answer, but I took a few minutes rather than just saying yes to try to explain why and how it is that attorneys general, and your practice, whatever your law practice will cross state lines. It just will, right? People move, right? Issues move. Problems that address them move. You buy a product, it wasn't made, down the street. You didn't buy it from a store that your uncle runs. That's not the way the world works anymore. And so it's by definition, no matter where you go, you're going to have to be able to understand that capital moves, people move, and so the law moves as well.
Role that has maybe caused you to question the integrity of not only yourself, but maybe the system? Is there one particular
Sure.
event?
Yeah, there is. We talk about democracy and being honest and true. The United States Supreme Court has launched itself and has for about 20 years now on a deeply, deeply misguided view that corporations are people. Corporations are not people. We're people. We live, we breathe, we love, we break up, fall in love. We're people. Corporations don't do that. And so by allowing the legal fiction to accrue that corporations are people, it allowed them to have the same First Amendment rights that we all should have because we are people, right? The right to speak in public, give money to campaigns. So they said, well, corporations are people, so they should be able to give as much money as they want to any candidate. And so this results in a dramatic shift in how democracy is to be true and integrated, to use Al Lowenstein's terms. It's very difficult to be honest and true if you know that someone's going to come in with huge amounts of money and knock you out of office, and it's hard to bring people together when people with a lot of money are trying to break you apart. So this is a huge challenge to our core system. It's a result of very misguided Supreme Court decisions. All these decisions have been 5-4. We had hopes that was going to change. It doesn't look like it's going to for a while, but hopefully it will in your lifetime. But the idea that corporations are people has always been morally offensive. In addition to legally wrong, it's always been morally offensive to me. Corporations are things that lawyers dream up in order to do business. Fine, great, happy for them, but they're not people. And I think that has posed a huge ethical challenge. It also gets in the way of trying to stop advertisements of their lies, right? That people are saying you should buy this product or that product, and it's just not true. And it's just a way for them to make money, and they'll say, well, we're a corporation and we're just exercising free speech. No, you're not. You're a business that's trying to make money by telling falsehoods to people to get them to buy your product, a product that might hurt them. And they said, no. So that is a core and I think fundamental issue which transcends any particular issue such as voting rights or the environment or consumer protection or certainly dealing with these sorts of issues. immigration issues. I think it's pretty basic. Well, we have one more question here. There we go. Yeah.
Dominican Republic. Thank you. And it's easy to, one of my clients actually became an ambassador of France. He left the Dominican Republic, became the ambassador of France. So it's easy to get documented, but what would you say and how do you help undocumented, like what do you do with the undocumented individuals that have a concern with immigration?
Well, this is going to be the subject for our subsequent panels here from the New York AG's office, the people in the Civil Rights Division who do that, so I don't want to mislead it. There's certainly always been a significant amount of don't ask, don't tell. You have rights, you work, you should get the minimum wage, you should be job protections, you should work in a safe environment, you should be able to function regardless of your status. That would be my position, but that's not the position of the President of the United States. He has a lot of power, and so the law in this field is clearly unsettled. So it is complicated giving clear legal advice, we as lawyers, which we have to do.
Partly to expose you, John Jay students, to the work of these offices. What we thought we would do now would be have just a very brief conversation with two people who were once one who is currently a John Jay student and one who was once a John Jay student, who actually have done some work in an office of an attorney general. Tracy-Ann Ulett is in the Attorney General's office in D.C., and Jesse Einfeld, come on up. You don't have to stand to the side. Spent a day working with the Office of the Attorney General in Connecticut. And what we thought we'd do is just have them talk a little bit about their experiences, and then sort of engage you all in a very brief conversation, if you'd like, to ask them questions, particularly the students who might be interested in thinking about this area. So I'd just like to start us off that. Thank you all for doing this. And I'm just going to briefly ask you, maybe Tracy, I'll start with you. Just tell us what it's like. You've made the trajectory. You've made that sort of journey from John Jay to the professional world, and now you're in the Office of Attorney General. Why did you choose that as a particular place to work, as opposed to other options you might have had?
While here at John Jay, I interned briefly with the Public Advocate's Office. Bill de Blasio was the officer there at that time. While there, I worked with the constituent service representatives, and I really admired the way that they sat down with individuals who were having issues with different government agency and gave them a voice. At that point, that's when I decided that I would go to law school. My sophomore year, I got connected with the Pre-Law Institute, which I believe everyone here, if you are thinking of going to law school, you should really take advantage of that program. And Vielka really helped me along the way in the application process and helped me apply to different law schools. I ended up at the George Washington University Law School, where I received my law degree. And what really attracted me to the Office of Attorney General is basically the way that they were able to advocate on behalf of individuals and give them a voice in this community.
And Jesse, you spent the day at the you spent the day at the Office of the Attorney General in Connecticut, and I thought maybe it'd be interesting if you told us what were your impressions of that experience, in terms of what did you think about the work that you saw that day? Was it different from what you expected? Was it very much like what you expected? What were your impressions from that experience?
Right. So before going to the Attorney General's office in Connecticut, I admittedly did not know a lot about the Attorney General. So it was actually very interesting being exposed just to how much they do. I was very surprised at the range of work that goes on in the Attorney General's office, and just how the different facets of law that they cover. So they do like consumer law, I learned about public safety law, environmental law. There's just so much kinds of work that they do that's not often talked about, I think, to law students or people that are interested in pursuing law, and how it's just all tied into the bigger mission of community service and community work, which is something that I'm interested in myself. So it was just interesting talking to all the different attorneys that do this kind of work, their work, their challenges, their journey, but how they're all connected through the same mission to serve their community, and how the work kind of ended up finding them and how they found themselves there for a common goal just to help the community.
nicely put. Having only spent a day there, I was wondering, do you have any thoughts that you might ask someone who is, who was actually sitting in your seat not so long ago? Do you have any questions that that day might have given rise to that you would like to ask Tracy-Ann?
Yeah, so a question I have for you was, being that John Jay is a school in the context of social justice, how did the social justice context of John Jay and the learning shape your influence to work at the Attorney General's office?
Well, as I stated, since I've been at John Jay, I was basically very committed to serving the interests of the individuals in society, mainly those who were unrepresented in society and often overlooked, such as the poor. I took that with me to law school, and while there, I interned at many different organizations, such as the District Columbia Housing Authority and a nonprofit here in New York as well that was committed to providing housing and medical care to individuals in need. And being from John Jay and having that experience and work in social justice really inspired me and pushed me to continue that work after law school.
Yeah, so another question that I have for you was, why the Attorney General's office, so compared to any other office of legal work that happens or any criminal law, corporate law, what's the importance of the Attorney General's office that led you to that work and that keeps you going today?
Well, basically, it was the opportunity that that came up. But what I really admire with working there is the ability of the AG to work with the different organizations around the neighborhood and really shape what's going on.
It's interesting how sometimes the work for you finds you, right? It's just an opportunity, but then it turns out to be the work that's really important for you. Jesse, I was going to ask you, is there anything else you want to? Because I think I'm hoping that Jesse is asking the questions that you would be asking and the questions that you have. And if you have any questions, do you have any questions for Tracy?
Tracy, what kind of cases do you handle at Assistant AG?
Well, I work in the public safety division, the mental health section. So our client agency is the Department of Behavioral Health, and cases come to us in two ways. The first way is if an individual is on the street and is acting in a way which makes the officer to believe he's likely to injure self or others and makes the officer believe that he has mental illness, the officer writes a document called the FD-12, which gives the state at least 2 days to detain that individual and give him the help that he needs. My role with that is after the 2-day period, if the Department of Behavioral Health wants to commit the individual, I actually litigate on their behalf so that that individual could get the help that they need. The second way the cases come to us is when an individual is arrested for criminal charges and it is decided that he's not competent to stand trial, he gets transferred to the Department of Behavioral Health so that they can restore his competency. If his competency cannot be restored, then basically our agency takes him in and gives him the medication and psychological help that he needs until he's able to be released in society again.
Question in the back.
Hi, my name is Ada Garcia. I'm a John Jay student graduating this year. So this is a conversation that I've had with Dr. Davison, but I just want to ask you because you've gone through it. When you get to law school, it can be very tempting to go into other work and not stay true to who you are and what you want to do to serve your community. To go into a big corporation, get a big payout, and kind of forget about what really drove you to be there. How did you stay true to yourself in that environment?
Going into the corporate field is very tempting. A lot of times I would tell individuals that I wanted to do social work, and their response was, "Oh, so you want to be poor?" But I mean, how I stay true to myself is, I was an immigrant. I came here when I was 5 years old illegally, and I witnessed a lot of what was going on around me. Many of my friends were poor. I grew up poor, and I just really wanted to make a difference in society, so that drove me to continue and want to go into the social justice field.
Hello, good morning. My name is Stephen Pacheco. I'm also a student at John Jay right now. And my question to you is going back to the mental health issue. And I basically want to know how does the Office of the Attorney General determine what is a level of competency? Like I want to kind of get into the weeds of that, so I don't know what question I should ask, but if you could give me as much context and insight, that would be amazing.
So that determination is not made by the Office of Attorney General. It's made by the Department of Behavioral Health, which is our client agency and who we litigate for.
Great interlude, I think, just to see from the student perspective, and we weren't really talking about the issue of immigrants, but it just does highlight the diverse range of work that is done in an Office of the Attorney General. So I'd like to thank you all really for coming and for showing our students exactly what they can one day become and one day do. Thank you very much. And
the impressive bios are in your program. Without further ado, I turn the panel over to Lourdes and her colleagues.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm Lourdes Rosado. I'm the chief of the Civil Rights Bureau in the Office of New York State Attorney General Eric T. Schneiderman. I'm here with my colleagues. Sonia Khan is an assistant attorney general in the Civil Rights Bureau with me, and Mayor Saxana is the chief of, the enforcement. I'm going to get your title. Civil enforcement within the Labor Bureau, but also a Civil Rights Bureau alum. So thank you so much for having us here today. We're very delighted to join you in this discussion of how the AG's office and other AG offices around the country help immigrants, including undocumented immigrants here in our country. So first I wanted to start off by telling you a little bit generally about what the Civil Rights Bureau does, and Mayor is going to tell you about the Labor Bureau, and then we're going to drill down to some of the specific initiatives and litigation that we're working on. So the Civil Rights Bureau, our mandate is to investigate and prosecute violations of federal, state, and local anti-discrimination laws on behalf of all New Yorkers. So that means we enforce laws that prohibit discrimination on a wide variety of bases, whether it be race, national origin, ethnicity, religion, age, gender, gender identity, disability, marital status, military status, and so forth. And we enforce these laws in a variety of venues, including in the employment sector, in schools, housing, and public accommodations. Now, as President Travis was saying earlier, we at AG's offices don't represent individuals. We don't take on private clients. Instead, our mandate is to represent the people of the state of New York. So even though that we represent all of New Yorkers, a lot of our cases and litigation starts with complaints from individuals, including folks who work in community-based organizations and other advocacy organizations that work one-on-one with folks in different settings. So we use a lot of different strategies to do our work. One thing that we have at the AG's office, which is an enormous tool, is under New York State executive law, we have the ability to start investigations and even subpoena documents and testimony under oath from businesses and other entities without first going to court to file a complaint. And that's an enormous power, and with it comes responsibility. So we can sometimes get a lot of work accomplished without finally actually going into court. That said, we also litigate in federal and state court. We do a lot of work in terms of community outreach and trying to educate folks and working with elected officials and other advocacy groups to educate the public about their rights and the laws. So, Mayor, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about what the Labor Bureau does?
Sure, yeah.
Are you on? How do you turn these on?
All right, better, nice. So the Labor Bureau, I guess we focus on wage theft when New Yorkers are having their wages stolen from them. That could be by non-payment, it could be by underpayment, and we bring investigations as well as civil litigation and criminal prosecutions against employers and other bad actors who are depriving New Yorkers of their fair wages. Our focus historically and still to today continues to be on low-wage workers, immigrant workers, and other workers who might be in vulnerable positions in the economy. In addition to wage theft, we focus on some other unfair, deceptive, or otherwise abusive labor practices. Recently, we brought a string of investigations around abusive non-compete agreements where you'll have an employee who is a sandwich maker who has to enter into an agreement that they won't be employed by another, fast food chain, within like 10 miles for years, and that really, mucks up the labor market seriously. So we kind of are going after those as well, in addition to a number of other kind of unfair labor practices that we can discuss.
So let me tell you a little bit about what the Civil Rights Bureau has historically done on behalf of immigrant individuals in our community. One area that we've been very active in since 2014 is basically breaking down barriers to school enrollment for immigrant youth. If many of you will recall, in 2014 we saw an unprecedented number of unaccompanied youth coming from Central and South America, and many of them made their way to New York State. At that time, our office started hearing about immigrant youth being denied access to school. Either they were not, totally turned away from school, or diverted to some type of alternative program that was not part of the regular school, and in some cases didn't even lead to, had work that led to a high school diploma. So our office was very concerned about that, obviously. Under state law, but also under United States Supreme Court case law, all children, immigrant children, have the right to attend public school. It was a very famous case called Plyler v. Doe, which established that that is a constitutional right, that it would violate equal protection to deny access to school. So we quickly partnered with the New York State Education Department to, first of all, survey all schools to see what their practices were with enrollment. We found a couple of dozen schools around the state that were improperly asking for documentation, for example, of citizenship status, visas, passports, and so forth, and that was illegal. So we quickly approached those school districts. A lot of them were very accommodating and quickly changed their policies. There are certain things that schools can ask for to show a child's age and that they're a resident of the district, which is totally lawful, but a lot of things that the schools were asking for were not. Unfortunately, some school districts were a little bit more recalcitrant, so we ended up having to go to court. Most recently, we had brought a federal lawsuit against the Utica City School District in Utica, which is an upstate, I think sort of north central New York. Sorry, I'm looking at my inner map right there to try to remember where it is. That school district was doing something that was particularly worrisome. I mean, basically what they were doing was they were not allowing older youth who were immigrants into the regular high school. Instead, they were diverting them into what was essentially an alternative program that was an ESL, an English as a second language. They were segregated from the regular school. They were not allowed to participate in extracurricular activities. And the program they were in would not ever lead to a high school diploma. So we brought a lawsuit against the school district in federal court, and were successful in finally defeating a motion to dismiss from the school district, which established some good case law about, again, our power as the Attorney General to bring these kind of suits on behalf of New Yorkers. Eventually, we were able to settle, and now the school is being monitored for the next 4 years to ensure that they, in fact, don't do that to kids. Another area that we do a lot of work in is immigration services fraud. Particularly in this climate where there's a lot of fear and uncertainty about what's going to happen, this is a prime time for people, unscrupulous people, to take advantage of immigrants and undocumented immigrants. So we have done historically a lot of work in investigating and prosecuting people who take advantage of immigrants. We have a number of cases. In some cases, we've won large amounts of money back from the immigrants who have been scammed. But the problem in this area, obviously, is that while we might be able to get restitution for the folks who've been defrauded, we can't undo the damage that's been done to the process by which they were trying to seek status in this country, legal status in this country. The damage is done. So it's a particularly worrisome area. We try to do a lot of education. Mayor and I and other members of our bureaus have been doing a lot of roundtables around the state and particularly around New York City, where we meet with community members to warn them about what's out there and to avoid being scammed. So I wanted to turn it over to Sonia to talk about one other area where we've been doing work with other AGs, and that's with regard to our work fighting the immigration ban that the federal administration has tried to impose. Sonia, I'm going to turn it over.
Thank you, and can everybody hear me? Yep. Okay, great. And thank you to John Jay for having us here. As Lourdes stated, we are actually, we're trying to be one of the leaders in fighting the travel ban or the immigration ban or the Muslim ban, whatever you want to call it. So basically what that means is in the last 4 months, none of us have gotten any sleep. January 27th, so I'm just going to try to take a step back and go over what the 2 executive orders did, so people just kind of understand the context and then go into what we're doing. So January 27th, the first Friday night, the first executive order drops, and it bans entry of individuals from 7 countries: Iraq, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. The order also imposed a 120-day ban on refugees with an indefinite ban on Syrian refugees. It also stated nothing with regard to who this applies to, whether it applied to green card holders, legal permanent residents, visa holders, etc. And in fact, there was a lot of conflicting guidance in the days after that came out from federal agencies stating who it applied to. So based on that, our office actually moved to intervene in the Eastern District case, which some of you may know as the Brooklyn case that everyone was protesting that Saturday night. There were protests at JFK, and then there were protests also outside of a courthouse in Brooklyn. And it was that case. The 2 individuals were actually Iraqi refugees. One was a translator for the army, and the other was a refugee who was coming to join his family here. Our office actually moved to intervene on a little bit of a different basis. As Lourdes stated, we don't represent individuals, we represent the people of the state of New York. So we really looked at and thought about the impact on the state of New York, on the health systems, on the fact that there are many doctors or residents who are coming from the banned countries who, if they're not allowed in, would really impact our health system. And in fact, there was, I believe, a Sudanese doctor in Brooklyn who was held back, and it was at a hospital which is designated as a high needs hospital. The head of that hospital stated that there were 19 doctors at that hospital, and losing one was very detrimental to the care that they could provide. And so we really took it from that angle. And even from an educational perspective, the scholars and the speakers and just even researchers who wouldn't be able to come back in the country. So we, in 3 days, put together a motion to intervene in a complaint and moved to intervene in that case, and that was ultimately granted. And as many of you know, there was litigation across the country on this, Washington State being the main, I guess, focus on this issue. And so when the Washington case actually resolved itself, it was a nationwide order, which impacted our case in New York. And ultimately, we kind of exited that case to an extent because the first travel ban was dealt with in another court. That case is actually still going on. The ACLU and DOJ, the Department of Justice, are still dealing with one discrete issue in that case, which is who was detained, people that were detained in that 24-hour period that the first executive order was in place. In the meantime, on March 16th, a second revised executive order was issued. And so in that order, it took out Iraq as one of the banned countries, which left 6 countries. It still had the 120-day refugee ban, but it dropped Syria being an indefinite ban on Syrian refugees. The second order also expressly stated that it did not apply to legal permanent residents or visa holders. Specifically, though, with regard to refugees, it stated that if you've, trying to become a refugee is like a 2-year extreme sort of vetting process. If you had gone through that process and the State Department had scheduled your travel, you could come in. Now, if you had gone through that process and the State Department did not schedule your travel, you were banned. So that that language was included in the order, and yeah, and so. And it also expressly stated that it did not apply, the executive order did not apply to people who were granted asylum. With that in mind, our office again entered into another case, which is the Washington case. Us, the New York, Massachusetts, Maryland, Oregon, California, and Washington all became plaintiffs in the Washington matter. So it's the same Washington matter that was dealing with the first executive order, but now we are challenging the second executive order. So now, as both AG Tierney and Lourdes were mentioning in terms of collaboration with other AGs, we're now plaintiffs with 5 other states challenging the second executive order. We drafted a complaint alongside other AG's offices, and we really dug deep in our own connections with advocates and organizations and even just cities throughout New York State to really understand how, even though the language had changed in this second executive order, how it impacted New York State. And we were able to actually get, I think, 16 declarations, which are essentially statements of support from anywhere from individuals, from I believe like the mayor of Rochester, to really state how refugees impact the communities, they provide jobs, they fill jobs, scholars, the importance of researchers, scholars, and even we had some declarations from members of the Yemeni American community in New York City, which is a very substantive community when it comes to businesses. I don't know if any of you remember the bodega strike that happened outside of the courthouses in Brooklyn. So we were able to put that together, and we entered into that case. And we've been what's called litigating, and if people don't know that word, that just means we're in court fighting, litigating that case. But at the same time, as many of you may know, there was a case in Hawaii that was brought, and there was a case in Maryland that was brought. And so the Hawaii court issued, again, a nationwide temporary restraining order, which again applied nationwide, saying that the executive order cannot be implemented. So that impacted our case, right? And actually, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, the judge in our case in Washington said, we're not, everything is basically put on pause in our case until the Hawaii case is resolved, because the U.S. is divided up into, I'm sorry if I'm giving too much background, but we're divided into different circuits, right? And so there's the district court level, and then there's the circuit court level. And so Washington and Hawaii are both in the same circuit. And so when the Hawaii decision came down, the Department of Justice appealed that decision to the Ninth Circuit, and that kind of impacted our case since we're all now in the same circuit. So right now we're on pause. We're waiting for the Ninth Circuit decision to come down. And additionally, there is the Maryland case, which is also has been appealed to the Fourth Circuit there. So right now, we're kind of waiting for these two circuit courts to make a decision, and I guess we're going to see where it goes. One sort of background contextual point I just wanted to say is I think a lot of people, when these executive orders came down, we were like, where did they get these countries from? Where did these come from? After 9/11, actually, there was then Attorney General Ashcroft put out a regulation and created this registration system. It was called NSEERS, which is the National Security Entry and Exit Registration System. What that system did was say that certain immigrants from certain countries, when they enter the country, they have to register. While they're here, they have to check in. And when they leave, they have to leave from certain ports of departure. This program was put in place. There were a certain number of countries listed, primarily Muslim countries, South Asia, Arab countries all over the world. And really, implementation of this program resulted in 80,000 men and boys being put on this registration system, and approximately 13,000, I believe, deportations. When President Obama came into office in a couple years after coming into office in 2011, the Department of Homeland Security at that time actually delisted the countries. So they took the countries off the registration list, and it was in effect, it was essentially not in effect. But the underlying regulation that created that registration system was still in place. That was not revoked. And so last December, you know, a lot of advocates in the community, even members of Congress, kind of brought this issue up and said, you know, at that time, I don't know if any of you remember, there was a lot of talk about a Muslim registry. This is all pre-travel ban. It's like there's going to be a Muslim registry, and there was a lot of fear that this this administration would come in and just put countries back on and reactivate this system. And so our office was the only state AG's office that actually wrote to the president to ask him to urge him to actually revoke that whole underlying regulation. And we're not going to take credit for this because I know for years there were a lot of advocates and many other people who did this. But 2 days after we sent that letter, it was revoked. And so the reason I brought this up is because in that revocation, in that regulation, there was something that was called the visa waiver program. And so the idea was that certain countries you wouldn't require a visa, right, to come in. There were a list of countries on that had you were required, they wouldn't qualify for the visa waiver program. That's where this list of 7 countries came from. And so I guess I just wanted to kind of state that because it's like this all has history. Like, you know, even when things aren't in the headlines, there's a lot going on. So yeah, that's where we're at right now.
Mayora, do you want to talk a little bit more, go a little bit more in depth with what the Labor Bureau has been doing in this environment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, hearing Sonia is like a fount of knowledge about, you know, this issue, but also kind of immigration law. Generally, it kind of makes me think, like, you can draw a contrast, right? The Civil Rights Bureau of the AG's office has been on the front lines of a lot of these issues, and we find ourselves playing defense as an office because we've got all these things coming down from the federal government. We've got to kind of deal with this, but at the same time, institutionally, as an AG's office, we still have to keep playing offense, right? We still have our initiatives that we care about. We have our enforcement, you know, programs that were around before this federal transition happened. So it really is kind of it really kind of stretches our resources. It forces us to kind of develop, you know, new kind of frontiers of knowledge. Like we all became like amateur immigration law experts over like a few weeks. So the Labor Bureau has been fortunate in that we've had a little less of that. You know, we haven't had this kind of all-out assault that we've had to deal with to play, you know, defense, but we've tried to take advantage of that kind of moment to breathe to figure out, well, how can we kind of adjust our priorities so that we can be ready should something happen, right? So we are trying to be extra attuned to issues in addition to the ones that I talked about, you know, wage theft and, you know, unfair, you know, employment contractual agreements, but also specifically looking at retaliation, labor trafficking, things that might happen when employers become emboldened by, you know, maybe a bad employer was kind of, you know, sitting back, but now they're emboldened by this new climate to maybe say, all right, you know what, if you don't, you know, continue working for me or drop your complaint or whatever, I'm gonna report you, or I'm gonna take your papers, and you know, and you're stuck, right? So what's good is that institutionally we have kind of, and this is important for AG's offices nationwide, to have connections to the grassroots, to kind of communities, to advocates, to kind of make sure that, you know, these stories keep bubbling up to us and that we keep hearing these complaints. But at the same time, it presents a huge challenge, which is we are still a law enforcement agency. And anytime, you know, something happens like this, like at the federal government or, you know, what have you, vulnerable workers, vulnerable citizens, and especially immigrants start to get skittish about coming to law enforcement. And we start losing complaints, and we start losing witnesses and affidavits and all of these things that are necessary for us to do our work. So I think kind of the thing that Lourdes talked about earlier, going out into the communities, outreaching, making sure these kind of bridges of trust are still there, you know, showing our faces with, you know, local officials, with city officials, with other people, with local elected officials, I think is hugely important, and we've tried to kind of drive resources into that type of work as well, in addition to continuing to push, our normal work.
Great. So Mayor gave me a great segue to the next topic that I wanted to talk about, and that is something that the administration has been talking about for many months, and that is sanctuary cities. It was very clear, even during the campaign, that the federal administration was very dismissive and antagonistic to the idea of any jurisdiction that they called a sanctuary city. Let me take a step back. There is no real legal definition of a sanctuary city. That term has colloquially been used to describe any city or state that decides to limit its involvement of local law enforcement in federal civil immigration functions. And we were very concerned because starting during the campaign and through the last several months, there's been a lot of, unfortunately, misinformation coming out of the federal administration about such jurisdictions. I mean, the two things that we've heard the most, which is very troubling because they're just absolutely incorrect, is the idea that sanctuary jurisdictions, which they've defined, the administration has defined somewhat as those who decide to decline to hold someone in custody, either a jail or a police department, in response to what's been is called an ICE detain, or some request by the U.S. Customs Enforcement, Immigrant and Customs Enforcement Agency. I only know it by its acronym, to hold someone in custody. And also that jurisdictions that limit their involvement in federal civil immigration functions are violating the law, and that they're making the public less safe. We very early on, even before certain executive orders came down affecting sanctuary jurisdictions, anticipated that this was going to be a line of attack for the administration, and knowing that we had a number of cities in New York State, including New York City, that had statutes on the books that limited the ability of law enforcement to become involved in immigration enforcement. We provided guidance very early on. It came out in January, even before the inauguration, that basically described how jurisdictions could limit their involvement without violating any federal law, and to promote public safety, because this is really at essence about public safety. As Mayor has said, when immigrants fear coming to court or going to the police to report a crime, to testify in court against a wrongdoer, we're all less safe. And law enforcement agencies around the country recognize that. We published this guidance to give also model language for those jurisdictions that hadn't already enacted policies or provisions, and also gave a webinar to law enforcement officials and elected officials around the state and even around the country about these principles. We also issued joint guidance with the New York State Education Department to schools about how to protect immigrant students, including what to do when ICE officials, if and when they came to schools, and whether to question a child or question an official about a child, or to try to get the child's records. In the interim, when all this was going on and we were issuing this guidance and trying to reaching out to different communities to assure them that the AG's office was still here, that we weren't going to ask about immigration status to anyone who called us, the president issued some more executive orders. That's been his way of getting things done. He issues these executive orders. And basically what these executive orders do is they basically prioritize the removal of anyone in this country who's undocumented. In the prior administration, the Obama administration prioritized only those people who were undocumented but who had committed very serious and violent crimes. The new administration has said, no, we're not prioritizing those people. We're saying anyone who's undocumented, we're going to pick up and we're going to seek to deport. So in that, they've also threatened any jurisdictions that don't cooperate, as they define it, with federal immigration authorities, with withholding federal funding from them, saying that they're violating the law. So we again, yes, actually earlier this week, with several other AGs, including the district AG from the District of Columbia, put out another report. It's really what we called, internally we called it our myth-busting report or debunking report, because we there, first of all, explain that jurisdictions that don't get involved in immigration enforcement are in fact not violating any laws. That's a complete incorrect statement by the federal administration. In fact, under our laws and our U.S. Constitution, local and state governments and law enforcement agencies have a lot of discretion to not get involved. And there are many reasons why they wouldn't. The report includes testimonials from law enforcement agencies, sheriffs, officers, chiefs of police around the country who say, we limit our involvement. We only get involved in immigration enforcement when there's a nexus with criminal activity because it makes our communities less safe when immigrants fear coming to court and coming to the police. So there's a lot of valuable expertise and long history of law enforcement knowing that this is the case. So it's definitely a fight. There's also been litigation around this. We haven't been involved, but a couple of cities around the country, most notably in California, the cities of San Francisco and Santa Clara County, bought a lawsuit challenging this executive order, which threatened to withhold money from jurisdictions that they labeled sanctuaries, and another court the court in San Francisco issued a preliminary injunction in April, basically enjoining the federal administration from taking away money from any jurisdiction that they would designate as a sanctuary jurisdiction. So there's a lot of fight going on here. And why is this important? Again, it really does go down to community safety and really knowing that we can't send immigrants behind closed doors because that's where criminals thrive, right? Criminals thrive when people are afraid to come forward, when people are afraid to open their doors, go to court, call the police, and it's bad for all of us. So that's really what we're focused on. So with that, I think, where are we at time, Mindy? Are we good? Should we ask for questions now? Yeah, so I wanted to open up to questions, comments on anything we just talked about. Yeah, sir. Mm-hmm.
Circuit is with what we're doing, but we have Second Circuit. What is they're not binding. Ninth Circuit and Second Circuit are two different circuits.
Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
That is true. We are two different circuits, but the orders that are coming down are nationwide. So sometimes when an issue, for example, even though it's only the Second Circuit only deals with like the northeastern area, say, right? But the issue that they're dealing with is a nationwide issue. And so when the court says, okay, this is a nationwide issue, so the order that we are going to be dealing with and the decision that we're going to be making is essentially the same facts and the same issues that other courts are dealing with. And so it can be implemented nationwide. They do have the power to be able to do that. Now, the issue may present itself that we have two circuits that might come down with two different decisions, right? Fourth Circuit could come down with one decision, the Ninth Circuit could come down with another decision, and all I can say at that point is stay tuned to see what happens. The next sort of, step would be the Supreme Court. So, yeah.
A group of people. Is there anything being done to ICE coming into people's houses and without a warrant and just arresting anyone? Do you guys get involved in that? Is there anything that you guys are doing?
You're asking whether like AG's offices have any role? It's hard to know right now. I mean, this is a new area for us. Typically, we, the Constitution really gives the power to the executive branch to regulate immigration. And our ability to get involved in challenging the executive branch's immigration policy really is limited. And that's sort of what is at issue in the immigration ban case, because what the DOJ is arguing is that this is really the province of the president. and what we're arguing as the AGs is that, yes, but he's violating the Constitution. So basically, for us to get involved and to challenge a practice, we'd have to show that it's unconstitutional. And I'm not sure yet if anyone has been able to articulate a rationale to say that ICE agents going into people's homes would be unconstitutional. We'd have to probably look at it more from the statute. I mean, the INA, the Federal Immigration Statute, gives a lot of powers to ICE agents that local law enforcement wouldn't necessarily have under our Constitution. So it's a very interesting area of the law where people are trying to sort of, in some ways, ICE agents are like, they wear different hats. Sometimes they are like acting as law enforcement, and sometimes they're acting with civil authority. So again, this is something where we're thinking right now, and I can't say that any AG's office that I know of has really articulated a sound basis for us to get involved in that area. Thank you. Other?
Hi, thank you for your time today. So this is more a question related to labor. So there's a lot of undocumented immigrants who work off the books and who get paid in cash. And they do get paid below minimum wage because of that. And they have so much to lose, like losing their job if they make a complaint. What can be said to them to encourage them? What can they look forward to gaining from bringing this complaint without feeling like it's not worth it because I'm going to lose my job, I won't be able to feed my kids, my family? What would you say to them to encourage them to still bring this complaint and that it's worth the fight?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. Look, I mean, it often takes somebody taking the food off of your table to actually make you stand up and fight for something, right? Sometimes you're not going to get up and fight for something abstract or distant until it's too late, right? But then you're in an acute situation, right, where you've got to decide between, you know, supporting your family, like running out and finding a new job, and then like devoting time to coming into our office and, you know, interviewing and, you know, giving an affidavit and stuff like that. So it's always wiser, right, to act when you see the problem earlier on, right? But I think you said something important at the beginning, which is you've got a lot to lose, right? And that is really important. And this is why we keep trying to hammer home the message that our office does not care about immigration status. We do not communicate with, you know, the federal government, you know, ICE or anything like that concerning people's immigration statuses. And our investigations are confidential, right? The only event in which like a name would be released, let's say, is if we had to, you know, go to court and litigate, and then, you know, somebody had to be cross-examined, right? Or somebody's identity had to be disclosed as a part of that process. But the great thing about one of the great things about our office is we're able to resolve a ton of matters, like the vast majority of our matters before litigation is even necessary. So we can keep all of this reporting and you know, all this kind of who is coming forward and all of that stuff completely confidential, right? Which is kind of an important message that we try to send when we're going out into the community, and talk to advocates and tell them to go back to their constituencies and tell everyone that this is the case.
Another great tool that both Labor and Civil Rights Bureau have is to do undercover investigations. We have a whole investigations unit made up of people who have worked as police officers and detectives in major law enforcement agencies, and we have testers, people that we send out undercover to, so that we don't necessarily have to rely on witness testimony from people who are currently being victimized to get the ball rolling, to get the investigation going. Other questions, comments? Yes.
Between the work of your office and this sort of the advocacy portion, and how is that? I imagine in your day-to-day life you are very busy with many things. How is it institutionalized that there is this outreach to advocacy, and how effective is that connection? Because it seems very clear that that's a big piece of what you do, that this is not strictly solely a legal analysis, but it's informed by sort of what's happening on the ground. How do you sort of institutionalized, or how's that structured?
Yeah, it's absolutely that connection and that ongoing dialogue with advocacy groups is absolutely crucial to our work on multiple levels. On one level, we have connections to a lot of the community-based groups who work one-on-one with immigrants around the city, and they are a really valuable pipeline to us of complaints. They are able to see patterns in practice, a particular employer, a particular landlord, a particular school, where they believe that there are violations of the law. And so they're able to bring that to us. On another level, we also collaborate with public interest law firms. Like we just the other day, we were downstairs. The Brennan Center from NYU just moved into our building. And we're like, hey, we're in the same elevator bank. Let's get together and have coffee. Brennan Center does a lot of great stuff. And one of the areas that they're very involved in is voting rights, which we're doing a lot of work on. And so it's great to be able just to get to talk with folks who are thinking about the law and thinking, we talked about issues that are really important to our work, like standing. As Attorney General, we're always struggling when we're going into court to sort of figure out, are we even allowed to get into the front door? Like, what's our injury, and how do we claim that? So talking with other lawyers about those kind of concepts. Another thing we're talking a lot about is the 10th Amendment. In this era, when the federal government is trying to impose on states things that we really don't want to do, we're looking at 10th Amendment anti-commandeering jurisprudence in a way we've never done before. And it's really wonderful to talk with other legal advocates about issues on that level. Did you guys want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I guess, how is it institutionalized? I mean, that's a good question.
It's a little ad hoc.
Yeah, it varies by bureau. I'd say it's institutionalized by lunch, by coffee, by kind of after work or before work, because there's a variety of people you can meet with, right? You can meet with, let's say, community, advocates of which, or advocacy groups of which there are a ton in New York City, and they're often willing to kind of come in, and we can have like an issue-specific roundtable, or maybe just a one-on-one meeting if we need to kind of refresh a particular connection. But we cover the entire state, right? So we can't just kind of, walk up to, anyway, yeah, exactly. We can't get all the way out to Western New York, et cetera. So we really have to kind of make a concerted effort there to get around. That's why our network of regional offices is actually really helpful, right? We've got regional offices essentially in the population centers dotted all across New York State. So we can, let's say, hold an event at one of our regional offices, or use that kind of as a gathering place, or maybe take a 2-day kind of tour out to the Finger Lakes, or out to Western New York, or what have you, and meet with a bunch of people. So that kind of more concerted stuff, more kind of planned stuff is there. And then, with this kind of more recent initiative, we're trying yet a different level, which is not so much advocates and not like a big event with like the AG or anything like that, but really kind of the like church basement, JCC kind of gym like level, where you've got people from the community, right? It's a town hall with like a local elected official. Some people are very angry there, but you've got kind of an event, and then you've got some advocates who show up, but then other people who are kind of influencers in the community, right? Who are not, formally designated advocates, but they're PTA folks, they're, principals, they're, yeah, exactly. Lots of examples of that, and that kind of outreach is yet another kind of different frontier.
Just one more thing to add, because I know there might be a lot of students here. Just structurally for the AG's office, I just wanted to let you guys know there's the defensive side of the office and the affirmative side of the office. And I used to be on the defensive side of the office. I was actually doing what you were doing, Tracy-Ann. Yeah, I was doing what you were doing in New York, and so I was defending the mental health system. And so on that end, when you're on the defensive side of the office, you're actually defending state agencies. So your interaction with advocates is very minimal. And in fact, you're usually on the other side of cases that advocates have brought against the state sometimes, right? On the affirmative side of the office, which is what the Labor Bureau and the Civil Rights Bureau does, we, like Lourdes and Mayor stated, we really actually rely on the knowledge and expertise of advocates. So there's kind of this internal dichotomy that exists.
Hi. To what extent do you get involved in dealing with the rise of hate crimes, et cetera? I mean, I know that at the district, at the state level, in terms of the DAs, right, the local DAs, there is a hate crime statute, et cetera. But to what extent does the state attorney general's office get involved?
That's a great question. So we actually, the brief answer is, so as the Attorney General's office, under our state laws, we have limited jurisdiction to criminally prosecute hate crimes, as you correctly pointed out. That really is in the province of the local district attorneys. However, there are some exceptions. We do have the ability to investigate hate crimes if the governor or a state agency refers a matter to us. That's on the criminal side. However, on the civil side, we also have powers as well. There is a New York State law that actually gives us the ability to civilly investigate a hate crime and seek injunctive relief. And so we've never used that tool. We actually discovered it in the fall. One of the first things that our office did was actually, in the wake of a lot of post-election hate crimes, bias-related incidents, we published basically a guidance to local district attorneys and law enforcement officers, actually just basically reminding them about the laws that we have on the books to investigate and prosecute these crimes. And in doing so, we sort of found this law that we have never used before, and that we're now we're anticipating being able to use that if we see a pattern and practice of bias incidents by a particular group in a particular community. So the answer is it's limited, but we're definitely exploring, at least on the civil side, doing more in that space.
And just semi-related note, we do, though, where we do have more expansive criminal jurisdiction, for example, in the criminal section parts of the labor law, we do actively coordinate with DA's offices to and especially, this is especially helpful where, you can imagine prosecuting labor crimes is not necessarily the highest priority at DA's offices, who are dealing with like everything from murders on down. But we have a good tool, which is that we can bring our own criminal investigations and then use those to focus people, convene meetings, with DA's offices who might be interested in these issues, other DA's offices who might be kind of on the fence or, exploring, and try to kind of persuade them that this is worth allocation of resources for them. So we are kind of networked in that way.
So you mentioned briefly the issue of fraud.
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing in terms of a practice of fraud, a recurring pattern of fraud? And is there a new fraud that we as consumers and family members of immigrants should be on the alert to?
Oh yes, there's no
Never go
lack
on the
of
internet.
Creativity. No lack of creativity of people who want to try to defraud us. So, I mean, let's say post-election, what did we see? We definitely saw a lot of ICE scams and some very, again, well put together scams where people would be receiving phone calls from numbers that, if you check the numbers, they actually were numbers from federal agencies, where people are being identified. It's like a robocall. They say that you owe money, you must send money to this to ICE. So we've been seeing more scams like that. We've always seen, but definitely more instances of people who are not attorneys, pretending to be attorneys, and making promises to immigrants. You give me $500, you give me $5,000, I'll get you status. I can give you a card, an ID card that's you can show to ICE. Just give me $1,000 for it. So we're seeing more of that. I'm trying to think what other scams on the labor side.
Yeah, I mean, on the labor side, the most common one you see is like a training, type scam where it's like, come here, pay me for X training or X service, and there's a promise of a job, on the other end,
Right.
and the job never,
Never
materializes, nor does really the training or any sort of real certification from it. I guess employment agencies are kind of, related to that.
Right.
That's more of a constant problem rather than kind of an uptick right now. But again, either the false promise of a job or a job that is, ultimately materially different from the one, promised, or pays a below minimum wage,
Right.
et cetera. Yeah.
Hi there. What would you like to do if you had more resources? What's left undone that's on your priority list?
Oh, wow. That's a great. That's a great question. I think, the challenge in this environment is to keep doing the bread and butter civil rights work that we've always done at the level that we have, and to take on the number of matters in this environment where we're constantly worried at 5 o'clock every day what new executive order is going to come down, and trying to maintain that level. So I would say, I don't know if it's more, it's always more people. We could definitely be taking on more folks. So I don't know if there's any wish list areas that we haven't gotten into. I think for me, sometimes the challenge is more that civil rights is such a big umbrella that everything falls under it. Not everything, but a lot of things fall under it. So we're constantly doing triage to sort of figure out where's the best place for us to be, what gap we can fill. Like, we think a lot about, okay, what are DAs doing in this area? What are the advocacy groups doing in this area? Where are the gaps, and trying to fill them. So I think more help would be great generally.
I think one thing I would just say was maybe like technology, having a little bit more resources when it comes to like data gathering and investigating and those sort of things. And I think this is probably true for any government agency.
Yeah. Just on the hire more people front, just to give you an idea, to do labor enforcement for the entire state of New York, there are 5 assistant attorneys general in my section, right? To do that's for civil enforcement. To do criminal enforcement, there are 3 additional, right? And then we have other attorneys who occasionally help out in the midst of dealing with their defensive side obligations, dealing with kind of Article 78s and things like that. In the Civil Rights Bureau, where are we up to right now, attorneys-wise? 9 attorneys, again, for the whole state, right? So that is an issue, but echoing the points that you raised, I think an important one, I think, is talking about the structure of an AG's office and what is like what are we good at, right? We're good at finding a great case with like a systemic wrong or systemic violation of law and shining a light on it, right? We can, bring an investigation, like a robust investigation. We have good kind of legal tools, at our disposal. We can litigate and we can do all of that. But then, and we can do that and then kind of move on to the next thing, right? And shine a light on something else, right? But if you're going to ask an institution like this to handle multiple complex litigations at the same time, or to, once we find, a particular wrong, and then like we get 20 more calls about more of those, right? It's just a matter of capacity, right? In terms of our ability to, we're not a primary regulator in most of the fields in which we regulate, I think, with the exception of charities in New York and maybe some others. So that's also kind of another challenge, which I think could be met with more resources.
Yes. Go ahead. Oh, there was one over here. Nope.
Yeah.
I get 2 questions. One, can you defend one individual, a state actor? And the other question is, one of Assistant AG abuses his power when they're doing defensive work, so who's in charge of investigating them?
Say that one. Wait, the first question is, what can we...
Do you defend one individual who's a state actor, use the resources, taxpayers' money to investigate as they're doing defensive work? And if an assistant AG abuses power in a defensive work, is there someone who oversees their work?
So this is on another part of the office than we work in. I mean, so I guess my information is limited, but I mean, we do, as Sonia said, there's a defensive part of the office that does represent state actors, so I think they do represent individuals in state agencies. Is that right? That is correct. In terms of an AAG who abuses their power, like who investigates them and what repercussions might they face if they misuse their power? Is that the question? If they do defensive work.
I mean, we don't. Like, none of us up here do, nor are we really, I think, qualified to speak on it.
Yeah,
but
unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean, I think any attorney who abuses their power, obviously, we're all licensed by the state of New York, and so therefore we're subject to disciplinary proceedings before the state. But beyond that, as Mayor said, I don't know the answer to that one. Yes. That young woman over there. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I wanted to know, how often do you guys go to the communities, or is there a way to find out when you guys are being there? So,
well, lately it seems like we're there every week. We do. We have been doing these immigrant roundtables, and we're averaging about once a week. We have to find out where we're going, we have an intergovernmental affairs office that arranges these roundtables, and you can always shoot me an email and I can put you in touch with the people there. The intergovernmental affairs office is, they have people who divide up the state, and so like you'll have someone who's in charge of Long Island and someone who's in charge of Brooklyn and Queens. So we can always put you in touch with people there who can let you know when we're going out to these community events.
And I think one other way to just keep tabs on what our office is doing is the AG's Twitter account, which is AG Schneiderman, and Facebook. And I would imagine that moving forward, a lot of this stuff is going to be on social media as well. You can find out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
That's right. Our social media person.
I know we're getting towards the end of the program, but I would be remiss if I didn't say this is what you have just all seen. This is what the world of state attorneys general and your very own Eric Schneiderman is really about. Here we have the work that you do is totally fantastic.
Thank you.
9 attorneys for the entire state is remarkable. But this really demonstrates, why a number of us are attached to the world of attorneys general and want to make sure that you all in the room as future lawyers or practitioners really understand what this work is. You go home feeling absolutely exhausted, but you did right.
That's right.
That's lesson number 1 that you should get from this. Lesson number 2 that you get from this is that there are 2 sides to the office. Every attorney general I used to call them the go-get-em guys and then the defending the state guys. Both of those roles are important. This isn't always about bad guys and good guys. It's just the role of the attorney general. So you can all judge, when you're working in an AG's office, or you think you want to, where you want to be. But there could be no institution which is really better than you guys in the state of New York. And I think that as taxpayers, we're all since I'm not in New York, but I did buy something here. I think we're all very, very fortunate to have you all. And I just want to close by asking you one quick question, then turning this back over to Dr. Davidson. So this is stressful work. I do sports, I run, et cetera, when I had to deal with 56 bosses. If you can imagine 56 Eric Schneidermans, how exhausting that is. You have one boss. So what do you do in your spare time to relax? Because, part of all of this, you hear all this stuff about work-life balance and you're going to be parents, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you do for fun that you want to say?
Yeah, I was going to say none of your business.
You want to say.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, honestly, stopping to take a breath is hugely important, whether you do that through meditation, through going for a hike in the woods, and it's, the season now, or it has been for a while. it is hugely important. And when I talk to law students too, I think that's an important message to send to law students or people who are thinking about going to law school. Law school is such a barrage of new information, new skills, new types of training. You got to prepare for class, your Socratic method, you're carrying around your books in your giant backpack all the time or like rolling it around. Just stopping to remember, why you're doing this. And maybe even, take a break from the law for a little while and think about something completely non-legal. Just to give your mind a rest, I think is hugely important.
Yeah, I mean, I do yoga. That's me, and I think the AG is also very big into yoga, AG Schneiderman. But yeah, I think self-care, no matter what point you're at, is incredibly important.
Absolutely. So I read a lot of fiction and write fiction, and I do arts and crafts, which I've done with my bureau now. We've actually had arts and crafts sessions. It's very important to get off social media for a while and not watch CNN obsessively. This gentleman here had a question or comment. Oh yeah, we have a whole legal recruitment department at the AG's office, and we're so excited because it's the summer and our law interns are coming. In the Civil Rights Bureau alone, we'll have like 7 or 8 law interns for the summer, and we have 1 or 2 college interns. And then during the school year, we also take law interns, but that's just one bureau. We have a whole legal recruitment. So if you shoot me an email, I'll put you in touch with our legal recruitment bureau.
Who is a CUNY alum, by the way.
Sandy Granum, that's right.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Oh, is she here? Yeah, we have a really robust internship program, and we depend on our interns a lot. We're sitting there like making our lists. They're all coming on June 5th, and we'll be giving them a lot of work when they get there. Yes.
Hi, I actually have 2, that's okay. You mentioned a lot of information, and I was wondering what would be a good source, because a lot of the news articles are very topical and they don't go very in depth the way that you guys did today. And also, to what extent do non-lawyers, people who might not have a law degree but maybe an advanced degree, master's degree, what role do they have within the office?
Yeah, good question.
That's it. Can I start with I'll start with the last question first. There's a great role. There are a lot of non-lawyers who are big contributors to the AG's office. So for example, in environmental protection, we have scientists. We have a whole research department who do all sorts of data analysis for us, which is very important in, for example, employment discrimination, any kind of discrimination, to be able to analyze, cut and dice large bodies of data. We have in our charities bureau, we have forensic accountants. So there's definitely a lot of professions who work with us in the AG's office who are not lawyers.
And our awesome cadre of investigators,
exactly.
too. Many of whom come to the AG's office after retiring from the police force or something like that, but some of whom come straight through after studying investigations and things like that, to start out.
Oh, and you had asked about sources of information. Well, that's a hard one. I mean, there's so many. I mean, I would say that in this environment, you do want to be careful about, what sources. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So I think the key today is multiple sources of information. Corroborate everything that you find from one source against another source.
And the AG's website is,
we have a lot of information.
A little bit from the last decade, but it is still a hugely deep trove of information if you want to dive down into something. If you go to, just ag.ny.gov, right? And then you can click around into the different sections. The labor part of the website has a whole, thing on labor law and know your rights, et cetera. We have all of our publications and our brochures, which have a ton of information, our reports, some of which are outside, all linked on the website as well.
Excuse me, could you just briefly tell us your trajectory from law school and how it led you to the AG's office? Just very quick. No, just
okay.
Just so we know how long you've been there, because the students here, I'm sure, would want to understand.
So I actually had another career before I went to law school. I was working in journalism. I worked at Newsweek magazine for a few years before I decided I didn't like reporting, so I decided to go to law school. And then I clerked for a year for a federal judge in Pennsylvania. And then I spent 2 years at the Prettyman program at Georgetown University Law Center, and that's a program for people who want to be criminal and juvenile defense attorneys. So I did that for a couple of years and taught in the clinics. And then I spent 17 years at a nonprofit called Juvenile Law Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where I started as a staff attorney, graduated up. I was associate director, and I did a lot of impact litigation and appellate advocacy around children in the juvenile justice system. And so I just joined the AG's office about a year ago to start doing the Civil Rights Bureau.
And I'm sort of a career AAG. I graduated in 2009, which was the height of the financial crisis. There weren't that many jobs, and I ended up being a volunteer attorney at the AG's office. And I started out in the Appeals and Opinions Bureau, which are all the cases that get appealed to the higher courts. I worked there for a year. And then I moved into our litigation bureau, so the defensive side of the office, where I was doing similar work to what Tracy-Ann was doing. A lot of trials, a lot of hearings, a lot of court time, writing, all that sort of stuff, which I think if you're a newer attorney is really good experience. And then after about 4 or 5 years of that, I ended up moving over to civil rights last summer right before the election. So, yep.
Yeah, and just a quick plug for the volunteer AAG program. So what that is it's essentially a one-year term for recent graduates of law school. Typically, to be hired on a paid basis at the AG's office, you need a couple years of experience.
Yeah,
but
I was hired. Ultimately, I'm still not a volunteer.
That's right. That's right. But so it's kind of a one-year term, and typically people find outside fellowship-type funding for it, and there's a lot of those things kind of out there. They're certainly competitive, but if you can do it, it is the kind of thing where, as far as you can run, the office will let you go. You know what I mean? You will do the work of an assistant attorney general. It is by no means an assured path, into the office, but it does happen, certainly, and either way, it's a really great kind of type of experience. I graduated law school in 2006, also a GW Law alum. I clerked for a judge in Pennsylvania, a federal judge, and I actually worked, Judge Brano, yep, and I actually worked for a law firm for about 6 years, and so some people I think were talking about the lure of the corporate side, which I could talk about all day. It's really kind of interesting, but it's not a trap. You can move back and forth in the law. If you find a job in the private sector, you're still getting training, you're still developing skills. The public sector is recruiting people who are willing to take the pay cut to go, to leave the private sector. So I worked at a big law firm in New York City for 6 years, and then I transitioned over to the AG's office, 3 years in the Civil Rights Bureau, and now in the Labor Bureau.
I'm glad that we went over time because it just reveals to me what important stuff you all highlighted, and it was really critical that we could hear that. And one thing that I was just going to say, and I think the questions also reveal, is that you all today gave us such a sort of a substantive dive into what you do, but it was also, I think, and most importantly, it was also quite humanizing. I mean, it also reminds us that, right, that a good lawyer understands that we're dealing with important legal issues. But right, the great lawyers understand that there's a human being at the end of those questions, right?
That's right.
And I think that's what we felt today, and I think that's really extraordinary from all of you. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. I just want to say a very quick thank you to everybody who came today, to Attorney General Tierney, to the panel here, to our student speakers. It was absolutely, I think, you will agree with me, it was an extraordinary morning. I want to say thank you to Marcus Green and to the Pfizer Corporation for the support of our students. I want to say thank you to Mindy Bachstein and Kathleen Salazar for all their amazing work, to Elizabeth Broccoli for all the help in putting this together. Thank you all. Students who are here, I really do encourage you to get in touch and use this opportunity to network and to sort of meet you never get the chance, or you don't never, but you rarely get the chance to sort of meet people as accomplished and who are as willing and as open as these people are here today. So really take advantage of that. Please make sure you come see us in the Pre-Law Institute. And while I have you up here, I'm just going to make a shameless plug for our immigration law program that we're doing this summer. For the first time, we are going to be able, through the Pre-Law Institute, to offer you a curricular opportunity, which is a chance to actually study immigration law. Basically, you'll learn about the immigration law, you'll learn about the Immigration and Naturalization Act, but most importantly, you'll have the opportunity to actually help through call-ins and other opportunities to help actual people who are in immigration distress right now. And this is this moment is critical. You've heard that theme over and over. But really, this opportunity allows you to both learn about the law, but actually to sort of to practice the law under the supervision of our great friend and colleague, Stephanie Delia, who works at CUNY Citizenship now. So thank you all for coming this morning. It really was wonderful. We look forward to seeing you next year.